Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the values that shape Judaism's civil code, Beyond Right. Lesson number 1, Beyond Good Neighbors, the laws of damages and disputes. In the late 70s, a group of white supremacists, maybe members of the Ku Klux Klan, the Nazi Party, decided that it's really important to them for them to hold a march in Skokie, Illinois. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this event. This caused a lot of controversy. There was protests, there was lawsuits, but ultimately at the end of the day, based on the principles of freedom of speech in the United States, the march was allowed to go on. Now, this sounds crazy. Why would any country, why would any society tolerate such evil being manifest itself publicly in the middle, not just of any area, but in the middle of a very Jewish area? Something like this would not have been tolerated in Europe, right? Try to pull this off in Berlin. Try to pull this off in France. Try to pull this off in Great Britain. I do not believe that it's going to fly at all, period. Now, there's another difference in law between how things function in America versus how things function in Europe, and that's when it comes to freedom of religion. In the United States, there is no official church of the United States. There is no chief rabbi of the United States. If you want to try to get any funding from the government directly to support a religious institution, very difficult, very challenging, a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. It's virtually impossible. However, in Europe, many countries have an official church and they have a chief rabbi, and they gladly provide funding from the government directly towards the religious institutions, so much so that in certain countries, when you file your taxes, you check a box of which religion you are, and a portion of your taxes will go to fund these particular places. Why is it like that? Why is there such a difference between the United States and Europe? One answer is because a society's values are expressed in its laws. Right? This is a really important idea, and one of the foundational ideas that we're going to be teasing out every single lesson in this course. Right? A society's values are expressed in its laws. The values of the United States, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, are enshrined in the laws of the United States. Europe, the values are a little bit different, right? Therefore, the laws as it pertains to freedom of speech and as it pertains to freedom of religion, of course, are going to be different. Now, I open the floor to you. Why is there such a difference between the laws of the United States and the laws in Europe? Any thoughts? We briefly discussed, Mitchell, yes. What are your thoughts?
It's the basis of why the country was founded. It wasn't founded on religion. It was founded on democracy of our own.
Very good. Very good, Mitchell. Karen, did you want to comment?
I was going to say the same thing because I was going to say, and we mentioned it last week in the little bit of our class, that that's how America was founded.
America broke away from Great Britain. America declared itself independent from a foreign power that wanted to control the United States. Therefore, the concept of freedom, even freedom of speech, even speech that by any standard would be considered to be hate speech, is therefore going to be defended. Do they believe in free speech in Europe? Of course they believe in free speech in Europe. However, they did not have the same conflict, the same history, the same battles over freedom that they had in the United States. So society's values are expressed in its laws. The same principle would apply to freedom of religion. The first pilgrims who came to this country were escaping religious persecution. The founders of this country knew what it means when a country involves itself in religion and the persecution that can result. So therefore, a society's values are expressed in its laws. In each and every one of these lessons, we're going to be focusing on area of law, and we're going to discuss how it is expressed in Jewish law, and how it's expressed in secular law, United States law, and we're going to see what is the underlying values in each of these legal systems. So if this is true in the American legal system, right, it's especially pronounced in the case of Jewish law. Okay, in order to better understand this idea that the society's values are expressed in its laws, I want to further clarify what the difference is in terms of the secular values that go into making up a legal system versus the Jewish values that go up into making the Jewish legal system. What is the law seeking to achieve? We know that every country on earth pretty much has some type of legal system. But what is the goal? What is the thinking behind? What is the purpose of that particular legal system? We're going to start with text number 1. Alan, would you like to read text number 1? This is on page 4. But this text is from the Declaration of the Rights of Man. This text was born out of the French Revolution. Thomas Jefferson was involved in the writing of this text, and the ideas within this text definitely form the basis of a lot of the ideas of democracy, individual freedom in Europe and the United States. So Alan, please, text number 1.
Liberty consists in the freedom to do everything which injures no one else. Hence, the exercise of the natural rights of each man has no limits except those which assure to the other members of the society the enjoyment of the same rights. These limits can only be determined by law. Law can only prohibit such actions as are hurtful to society. Nothing may be prevented which is not forbidden by law, and no one may be forced to do anything not provided for by law.
So there are 2 options for a society. Option number 1, no laws, absolute, complete freedom without any restrictions. Option 2 is we have a society with laws. Based on this document, what is the reason and the goal to have a society that has laws? Any thoughts on that text that you just read? What's the underlying value that's being represented? All right, Phil?
Yeah, well, so basically do no harm to others. You can do what you want to do, but you can't do harm to others, as others should not be doing harm to you. And then so the laws are designed so that doesn't happen. But if you want to take a walk, you can take a walk. If you want to get in your car, you can get in the car, but you can't run over somebody, for example.
Absolutely. The value is freedom, right? That is the value that we have in the Declaration of the Rights of Man, is freedom. However, if everyone is free to do what they want, there is going to result in some type of conflict. So how does the secular law perceive its purpose? We have to protect the rights of the individual. Law is there to ensure that the individual maintains their freedom. You have the right to do what you want, when you want, how you want. However, right, we have to make sure that you do not inflict on the rights of anyone else. So the law is there to maintain public order, to maintain that to ensure that by me practicing my rights, I don't infringe on your rights. Right? That's the idea that we're saying here. So the goal of law from a secular perspective is to ensure that people do not infringe on the rights of other people and to protect the rights of each individual to live how they would like. Right? Any comments before we move on to the Jewish approach to law?
Well, clearly it's a matter of priorities, though, because the European method is to put a higher priority on order. The American method is to minimize order in favor of individual activity. That's
absolutely true. And a lot of that is born on out of the history that we talked about previously, that in America, in the colonies, people felt a very strong sense of being controlled, and they rebelled against that. to the extreme, for better or worse. While in Europe, but they don't have the same history. So while human rights are valued, right, they emphasize a little bit more the element of the community. So definitely we see how the value system, even though very similar, there's a clear difference between Europe and the United States. Yes, Mitchell?
Well, we're going through a more significant conflict now that sort of negates some of this, and that's the idea of pro-choice versus abortion. Who has what rights? Who has the right to do what? And one group said you don't have a right to do it. Another group says I have an individual right to do certain decisions. And right now, for 50 years, it was one way. After 100 years, the other way. And it's in conflict. And it's not just the individual, it's the concept of what society is able to allow or not allow. And the individual is being lost in certain ways if the potential new ruling, which stood as law for 50 years, has changed.
You bring up a very good point, Mitchell. And there is constantly a battle, a struggle, is a conflict between the interests of the individual and the interest of society at large. And at different points in history, it can flip-flop back and forth, but there's always that constant struggle. So we're making a statement at this point in a very general sense, because there's always exceptions to every rule. Every case is different, but in a general sense, the goal of secular law, American law, is to protect the rights of the individual, absolute freedom, and at the same time ensure that you do not harm another person, right? That's the legal code. Now, what about Jewish law? What is the underlying value that drives and shapes and forms what Jewish law is all about? So we're going to go to text number 2. It's a fabulous text from the Abarbanel. And I'm going to go here to David. You may not be able to hear so well, although I'll ask him to read loud and clear, but please follow along in your book on page number 5, text number 2.
Every human society requires laws. What's the advantage of God's Torah laws over the legal system set up by other nations? Why does the verse state that these are the laws you shall set before them, thereby telling us that these laws are a unique divine system exclusively given to us by God? The reason for this is that the divine laws contain elements absent from other legal systems. God's laws are based on the principles of compassion and goodness.
So the Abarbanel asks a really great question in this text. He says, why do we need the Torah to have a system of civil law, criminal law? Why is that necessary? People can come up with it on their own. We have a constitution in the United States, right? Western democratic countries in Europe have constitutions. Society seems to function pretty well. We understand that the Torah needs to give us religious law. The Torah has to give us Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, Shavuos. These are ideas which we would not come up with on ourselves. They're clearly divine. They're clearly religious. What's the need for a civil code to be in the Torah? And the Abarbanel says, because God's laws are different than man's laws. Why? Because they're based on the principle of compassion and goodness. Now, if I would go to Washington, D.C. and walk into the Capitol and start interviewing members of the Senate, House of Congress, and ask them if they believe that the laws in the United States are based on compassion and goodness. Do they believe that as members of Congress, they are fighting for and defending and promoting compassion and goodness? What do you think the answer is going to be? I have a feeling that most people who are involved in the United States government feel that compassion and goodness is absolutely something which drives them and is something which drives the legal system. So how are we meant to understand this statement of the Abarbanel? For this, we have to go to text number 3. Karen, would you like to go to read text number 3?
Diligently observe God's commandments that he has commanded you. Do what is right and good in God's eyes.
Here we have a verse, right, in the Torah that tells us something that we have not heard before. This is new information. We have a command in the Torah that says, do what is right and good in God's eyes. This means that from a Torah perspective, there is actually an obligation for a person to do things that are viewed as right and good in God's eyes. Very different than the secular perspective. The focus of a secular legal system is to protect people's rights. The focus of a Jewish legal system is to do what's right. The Torah doesn't just have a civil code. The Torah has a civil code that's based on not protecting rights, but it's based on doing right. And there's a major difference between these two ideas. Secular law does not concern itself with you acting like a mensch. That's not what they're worried about. Secular law ensures that you can do what you want, when you want, how you want, and the government is not going to get involved in your life unless you are stepping on the rights of another person. Do what you want, don't harm the other guy. However, from a Torah perspective, we are not just worried that you don't hurt other people. We want you to help other people. Don't just not hurt. We actually want you to help. We are concerned with the well-being of other people. We want you to be a mensch. A really great way of thinking about this is the difference between a coach and a referee. I don't know if you're a sports fan, not a sports fan, but before the game, usually the umpire, the referee, is going to bring the managers together, the coaches together, sometimes the players together, and might give a little bit of a speech. Before the game, the coach, right, the manager, may also bring some of his players together and give them a little speech as well. What's the difference between the speech of a referee versus the speech of a coach? What does the referee want to accomplish? What does the coach want to accomplish? No Yankee fans are allowed to comment, just so we know.
I was just going to mention the Reds.
Any thoughts on what is the agenda of a referee? Yes, Phil.
Well, the referee wants to make sure everybody follows the rules and doesn't infringe on, hurting someone else because they've broken the rules. And the coach just wants the team to work together to win the game and to support each other.
Absolutely. That was
And isn't the
very
ref,
beautiful stated.
isn't the
Yes.
ref also going to say, play fair?
The ref is very concerned that you play fair, that you follow the rules, right? You don't hurt anyone, you don't injure anyone, you don't foul anyone, you don't infringe on the rights of the other team to do well. This is very similar to the approach of secular law. The approach of secular law is we are the referee. We are regulating society to keep within the rules so your team can do what it has to do without infringing on the ability of the other team to do what that team has to do. What is the coach doing? The coach, right, wants to bring out the best of his team. The coach wants his team to succeed. The coach wants his team to do well. He's going to inspire them and motivate them to do the best that they can. This is similar to the perspective of the Torah. The value system that underlies the Torah's legal system is to guide society to excel and to be good. The Torah wants people to be happy, to be healthy. The Torah wants people to be a mensch. From a secular perspective, the question is, in this circumstance, are my rights being violated or am I violating the rights of other people? That's the necessary legal question. The Torah perspective is, what's the right thing to do? That's what the Torah is concerned about. This idea is expressed very beautifully in a teaching of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe in text number 4. Marcus, how would you like to read text number 4? You could unmute yourself and go for it. Text number 4 on page 7. Marcus, we'll give you another minute or a few seconds to see if are you able to unmute yourself? I can actually ask
Yeah.
you to unmute yourself and see if
Okay,
that'll
you're talking to me?
Marcus Bandos.
Oh,
There
Marcus
you go.
Bandos. I'm sorry, I'm Jeff Marcus. That's good. I know Marcus Bandos.
I was,
Yeah,
that was funny. Okay. Marcus Bandos, go for it.
Okay, there are two types of laws, laws that create life, laws created by life. Human laws are created by life. God's Torah is a divine law that creates life.
So this is a really great line here by the Sixth Rebbe. It says, what is secular law? Secular law is created by life. People are given freedoms, right? When people are interacting with each other, sometimes those freedoms are going to come in conflict. Therefore, we need to create laws that are created by the experiences of life to protect the rights of people. So those laws are going to regulate society. Now, what type of people enjoy to study law on a regular basis? Legal professionals, right? Your typical person does not open up a law book of any law ever. Now, there may be a time where you need to know a law, you have to look something up, but a typical person is not going to wake up in the morning and read a book of law while eating their Fruity Pebbles. That's probably not going to happen. Now, what is Jewish law about? Jewish law creates life. It's authored by the creator of life, and the idea behind it is to create life. It's to shape society. Therefore, who is going to be interested in learning and studying laws that are designed to create life and to shape society? All members of society, which means from a Jewish perspective, every Jewish man, woman, and child on a regular basis engages themselves with studying Jewish law, not just because I need to know what to do practically, because the law represents the values of life. And through that study, you connect with that and you live with that in a very, very deep way. In Australia, it's a very prominent rabbi. His name is Rabbi Groner. Rabbi Lisker from Mequon is married to Rabbi Groner's granddaughter. Rabbi Groner is a very powerful figure, really built the Jewish community in Melbourne tremendously, and he was the dean of Yeshiva College in Melbourne. He had an appointment at the bank to go over a loan application. And the banker was trying to figure out exactly what type of school is this Yeshiva College that should be worthy of a loan. And Rabbi Groner said to the banker, you want to know what type of school this Yeshiva College is? In this school, we make mensches. That's what he said. That's what this school is all about. It's a yeshiva, right? We study Torah, we study Jewish law. The idea is to make mensches, because that is the goal, that's the value that underlies Jewish law. Now that we have this introduction, we can get into the various case studies. So you could turn to page 8. Case study number 1, or case study A, is a little bit long, so we're not going to read the whole thing. I'll just share with you very briefly the story. In 1848, a German immigrant comes to the United States. He moves to San Francisco. He goes into business. He opens up a mortuary, and he actually does very well for himself. He finds a perfect piece of real estate on a hill in San Francisco, builds a nice little house for himself. Some years go by, and some of the more wealthy individuals in San Francisco decide that they would like this real estate, this territory, for their mega mansions. And they start buying up entire blocks of property in order to build their mansions. You can see on page number 10, you can see some pictures of these mansions. Charles Crocker, a railroad baron, is buying up all the land around this young family. However, they don't want to sell. They worked hard. They like this piece of property. They like the neighborhood. They want to stay. So what does Charles Crocker do? He builds a fence on his own property that surrounds on 3 sides the house, the house of this German immigrant family. The fence is 40 feet high. It cost approximately $3,000 to build in 1878. You could imagine how much money that would have cost today, right, in today's dollars. The result of building that wall, not only did he not have a view anymore, not only did the young family feel like they were, surrounded by this dungeon, 1878, there's no electricity. There's no electricity. During the day, right, how are you to have light in your house? Windows. That's the only way. But as a result of the fence that was built, they lost the ability to have fresh air. They lost the ability to have any light, and even in the day, they could not see without candles. So now we're up to case study number 1. Again, the underlying question: when is doing the right thing an obligation? So in case study A, should Charles Crocker's fence be allowed to stand? So now I open the floor to you for a minute or so. If anyone has any preliminary initial thoughts from a legal perspective, should Charles Crocker be allowed to maintain his fence? After all, he paid for it. It's on his own property. Or is he somehow violating the rights of the German immigrant family?
I have a question.
Yes, go for it.
Okay. The initial email that you sent out, you mentioned this particular case, correct?
Correct, yes.
So here's what I want to, I have a comment, but here's what I want to know. In the email, you spelled Young initially Y-U-N-G, which indicates like it's sort of the Chinese spelling, but then said he was a German immigrant. Then later on in the email, you spelled Young Y-O-U-N-G. Okay, is there a significance to that, or just is that part of it?
There is no significance to that other than a poorly edited email, unfortunately. But there's no significance to that, no.
And nobody caught up with me. Okay, that's fine.
There you go. I'm going to
yeah.
send you all my emails to proofread.
This is an interesting, okay, by the way, is this a true story?
100% true, yes. And as you can see, the very picture on page number 10 of the actual house here.
Okay, well, I didn't download anything yet.
Okay.
The reason it's so interesting to me is because there was a gentleman, I think he's deceased now, named Mackie Westbrook. He worked in the mayor's office at City Hall. And I was doing the news years ago on WWM, and we had this tape we put in that every week that, Mackie Westbrook. I didn't know who the guy was, okay? I just played it. But he was on the radio. I'm listening to him on the radio once. And this is years later. And he's talking about something called, I guess it's kind of famous in Milwaukee. Maybe some of the people in the room know this, called the Spite House, S-P-I-T-E, Spite House. That's in Milwaukee off the corner of State and like Prospect. It's the Alice Gallery now, and there's a house next to it. It might be a law office. I don't know. There'd be two beautiful houses. One guy had a problem with the other guy, so he built a house in front of it or something, blocking his view of the lake, which at that time didn't have any buildings on that side, I suppose, or maybe I think the house 1890, I don't remember, but it's called the Spite House. Of course, it's still standing. Both are still standing. As far as if the gentleman can do what he, can do that, it was on his own land. I don't know, obviously in Bayside, if I wanted to build a fence, I'd have to get permission. The fence would have to be no more than 10 feet high or whatever the case. I think if that's the rules, okay. I don't know what the rules were in San Francisco. But if there was no rule that the thing couldn't be 40 feet high and it's on his land, the guy might be a schmuck, but I guess he could do it.
Quite possibly. And this case would definitely go under a spite fence type of discussion. Yes, Phil.
Well, I think he's depriving the Young family of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is part of our founding motto. I forget which document it's in. So he can't pursue happiness if he's blocked from doing so by this fence.
Right, so Phil would make an argument that there's actually infringing on his rights. Okay, we will get back to this case shortly. Let's go to case study B. And Phil, would you like to read case study B, page 11?
Okay, so Rachel maintains a large and beautiful flower bed in her yard. But one day her neighbor Joe built a high wooden fence between their properties that cast shade over the garden, causing the flowers to die. When Rachel asked Joe why his fence needed to be so high, she was told that it was necessary to protect his birds from cats entering the property. Rachel offered to replace the wooden fence with a glass screen at her personal expense in order to allow her flowers to receive sunlight without exposing Joe's birds to danger. But Joe refused to allow Rachel to replace the fence without offering any reason.
Here we have another case that involves a fence, but there are definitely some differences. So in case B, should Joe be required to allow Rachel to replace his fence? Can we obligate Joe to remove his fence and Rachel will install a new fence? Or really, Rachel perhaps would be removing it as well. All right, Mitchell, yes.
This came up the other day. I don't know, was it you or Rabbi Rappaport teaching it? But the idea is if you build, if it doesn't take away from your use and doesn't inconvenience you other than you have to have a different, something different, but everything else is the same, they gotta allow it is what came up.
I'm asking for your personal opinion. What is your personal opinion on what the law should be? What do you think?
Well, can I say
Yes,
something?
Sandy, what are your thoughts?
Yep. Well, I mean, obviously the secular law is gonna say, sure, you can do that, but is it right? It's not right, because I mean, you really are not taking into consideration others when you're doing what you're doing.
Okay, so from a legal perspective, there might not be anything that can be done about it, but certainly from the moral perspective, it bothers you.
Right, it bothers me a lot.
All right, very good. All right, let's go on to case number C. Sandy, how would you like to read case number C? Do you have the printout?
I have the printout, but I'm on my phone, so I keep
okay.
having to go back and forth. It's harder for me to read it, so.
Okay, let's see. Is anyone? I think everyone has read. So, oh, Mitchell, how would you like to go? This one is perfect for you as an expert in technology, right? This is perfect for you.
C, Michael moved into a new house. Before setting up his own Wi-Fi connection, he realized that his neighbors have an open Wi-Fi network. And Michael uses neighbors' Wi-Fi network without their knowledge.
So this is a fabulous question, because we've all been in the circumstance where we need to get a little bit of Wi-Fi and we find an open Wi-Fi network. So the specifics of this case is, can Michael use his neighbor's Wi-Fi without their knowledge? But this case could be presented in many different ways. It could apply when the people have a password, if they don't have a password, if you know their password. There's many different applications of this. We've all been in that circumstance. We need a little bit of Wi-Fi, and we're just hoping that there's an unprotected Wi-Fi near us so we can use it. Does it make a difference if it's on a temporary basis, a permanent basis? How would you feel if your neighbor moves into your next door to you, and is using your Wi-Fi without your permission? Legal, illegal, right or wrong?
That's stealing.
All right, Marcus says that's stealing. Why is it stealing? Because he's using your stuff?
Because you're taking something that doesn't belong to you.
So Marcus
Someone
says,
else may be paying for it.
Marcus says someone else is paying for it, that Wi-Fi doesn't belong to you, and you're using someone else's thing, right? This is not that's stealing. That's the definition of stealing. The definition of stealing is using something that doesn't belong to you. Yes, Mitchell.
Yes, but in theory, it's not like you're stealing money. It's not like you're taking a dollar bill off the table. It's in the air and you can't see it. It's an invisible concept of electronic wave. And maybe it's not right to use it, but it's not really the same as stealing.
Very good point. The concept of Wi-Fi is something that the founders of the Constitution could not have imagined in their wildest dreams. If you would have explained it to them, they would not have believed you, and they could not have legislated anything about it. So it's quite an interesting case. Is it theft or is it something different? Let's go to case study D. David, how would you like to read case study D on page number 12?
No problem. Sarah's next door neighbor, David, left on a lengthy vacation. It's difficult to find parking on their street, and David's driveway, situated smack in between their two homes, is now empty. Sarah wishes to park her car there while her neighbor is away.
This is a very, very relevant and practical case for anyone who's ever driven in New York and has circled the block at 1 o'clock in the morning, around and around and around, and cannot find a parking space. Should Sarah be allowed to park in David's vacant driveway? David's not home. David is on vacation. David and his wife will be gone for 2 weeks. It is so impossible to find parking in Sarah's neighborhood. She would love to be able to just drive her car, park it into David's driveway, which is not being used, and it would make her life so much easier. Legal, illegal, allowed, not allowed. Any thoughts?
Well,
All
she
right,
should have
David.
thought of that before David went on vacation. Not good planning, Sarah.
This is true. She did not think of it. She didn't know about it. David, yes.
Yeah, I would just say that it's a little different from Wi-Fi because Wi-Fi is not an inexhaustible resource. You're using bandwidth. So it's in the case of the driveway, parking there doesn't necessarily wear down the concrete or anything like that. It's pretty much an inexhaustible resource. And again, it's probably not the nicest thing not to have asked beforehand, but there's nothing that's being taken away from the owner of the house if she were to park there.
All right, David makes some very good points. He says
But
that
it's
it is
not
an.
right.
All right, yeah, Karen, yes, Karen, go for it.
It's not right. It's not her driveway to park in without getting advance permission.
All right, we have differences of approach between David and Karen. Yes, Phil.
So I think this is trespassing. You're using someone else's property for your own gain. So I think this is just trespassing. Is anybody who's ever gone to the state fair knows that people open up their driveways and you can park there, but you have to pay a fee.
I went to a Packers
we're
game
missing.
and I paid for a parking spot in someone's driveway. It was a unique experience. All right, Alan, yeah, you had a thought.
You know, there's two things going on here. Number one, who gets hurt? And number two, what is the appropriate remedy? The American system basically says you can't even go to court unless you can show you've been damaged. How does the guy whose driveway wasn't being used get damaged in this situation? Similarly, unless it's costing him some money, what's the damage to the fellow whose Wi-Fi is getting absorbed? On the other hand, there is damage to the garden. There is damage in terms of light and air and circulation in the spite fence case. All these things go back to the basic American legal systems theory that no damage, no case. If there's damage, the question becomes, what's the remedy? And the usual American remedy is compensation, but not some kind of affirmative action to change things. So a court wouldn't order a glass wall instead of a wooden one, but they'd order the obnoxious wall to be removed if it caused damage. I just think that, clearly the religious consequences are not the legal consequences. How you should behave is different than what the legal system is going to say.
Right, very good points. Alan, I'll let Phil have the last comment on these questions before we move on. All right, Phil.
Well, I had a truck parked in my driveway once to deliver something, and after they left, I thought, well, they did a great job, until I looked at a very large stain on my driveway from their leaking truck, which remains to this day. and really upsets me. So how do we know the car will not damage the driveway by leaking oil or gasoline or whatever, or leave marks on the driveway from the cars? Do we know that in advance? And then, so the neighbor comes home and he sees this, he says, well, how did these oil stains get on my car, get on my driveway? So he's trespassing and he could cause potential damage.
All right, fantastic points. And we are going to address just about every one of the points you made, because they're all relevant and are going to factor into the final decision. So what does Jewish law have to say? So we have established clearly that Jewish law is not only about preventing people from infringing on other people's rights. Jewish law is concerned with doing what's right, and as we're going to see, can actually compel and obligate a person to do what's right. But what exactly does that mean, right? What are some examples of Jewish law forcing a person to do something? So let's go to figure 1.1, which is on page 12. Now, if you don't have it in your book, that's okay. We have some of the examples right here on the screen on the PowerPoint. Torah is premised on compassion and goodness. The Torah says, do not stand by when someone's life is at risk. That means from a Torah perspective, you are obligated to step in. You're obligated to involve yourself when someone's life is on the line. From a secular perspective, there is no such law. You are not obligated to get involved when a person is having a heart attack in front of you. A person may be choking in front of you. You are not obligated to jump in with the Heimlich maneuver. However, from the Torah perspective, you are absolutely obligated. The same way you're obligated to fast on Yom Kippur, you're obligated to jump in when someone's life is at risk. Another example, you're obligated to provide roadside assistance. From a Torah perspective, you can't just drive by a person who has a flat tire on the side of the road. Now, I can tell you that I actually put this into play on a few different occasions. In the summer of 1999, I was a counselor in Beverly Hills Day Camp in Los Angeles, the group of guys. And we drove all over California. Every Shabbos, we went to a different Chabad house, and we made a resolution at the beginning of the summer that we are going to stop for anyone who's on the side of the road. Anyone, Jewish, not Jewish, doesn't make a difference. And we stopped probably a dozen times throughout the whole summer, helped with changing tires, giving people directions, seeing if anyone needs help. The Torah says you must provide roadside assistance. The example that the Torah gives, you are marching down the streets and you see whether it is your enemy or your friend is having trouble loading his donkey, having trouble. You're obligated to pull over and to help the person load the donkey. Now, trying to apply this today, does that mean you're obligated to do it in every circumstance? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Why do I say that? Because it could be dangerous, right? You're not obligated necessarily to put yourself in danger. However, from a Torah perspective, you can make a pretty strong argument that you are obligated in many circumstances to help a person who's pulled over on the side of the road. The Chabad rabbi once tells the story that he's driving down the road and he sees a person with a yarmulke, right, who is having car problems, pulls over, helps the person and asks them, what shul do you belong to? What synagogue do you go? And the person says, oh, I'm not Jewish. He says, why are you wearing a yarmulke? Says, my mother told me that if you ever have car problems, put on a yarmulke at the side of the road and you are going to be helped. So the Torah actually obligates it. And I actually have to tell you that in the summer of 2002, I believe it was 2002, I was head counselor of Lubavitch Day Camp in Toronto. And there was a huge, massive blackout in the Northeast. It was terrible. Like the entire place, the electric grid, it was down. Nothing was working, no electricity at all. Toronto, no electricity. So me and my friends decided we were going to go to Montreal for Shabbos that did have electricity. It's something like a 5-hour drive to get from Montreal, to get from Toronto to Montreal. Exactly halfway through in the middle of nowhere, we blow a tire. Right? We are stranded Friday afternoon, the middle of the summer, and we have no ability to change the tire. 2 Jewish people stopped to see what they can do to help on the middle of the highway. However, they were preceded by a non-Jewish couple who passed us, went off the exit, drove back on the highway and around, and picked one of the other guys up, drove into the next exit, contacted a tow truck. The person came, changed our tire. We made it to the next town. From a Torah perspective, you are obligated to provide roadside assistance. From a secular perspective, you are not, right? No one can legally make you change a tire. From a Torah perspective, you are. The Torah prohibits spreading gossip. From a secular perspective, right? So how many companies, how many news stations, how many TV stations, how many magazines, how many websites make their entire living on spreading gossip? But what does the Torah say? The Torah says you're obligated to be a mensch. The Torah wants you to do the right thing. The Torah is like your coach, not your referee. The Torah is telling you, be the best you can be. You got to be a mensch. So there are many, many mitzvahs where the Torah actually obligates you, and in many circumstances can compel you to do the right thing. Let's go to text number 5. Karen, would you like to read text number 5, please?
Sure. Our sages expounded on this verse and explained that it instructs us to go beyond the letter of the law. In other words, the Torah first exhorts us to observe all of God's commandments, and now it instructs us to be careful to do that which is right and good, even when not explicitly commanded to do so, because God cherishes good and proper conduct. This instruction is very important because it would be impossible for the Torah to exhaustively address all of our conduct with our friends and neighbors, all of our business affairs, and the welfare of society and the world. Instead, after offering multiple specific commandments, such as you shall not go about as a gossip monger, do not take revenge or bear grudge, do not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood, do not curse even a deaf person, and stand in the presence of the aged. The Torah then concludes with the generalized command to do that which is right and good, meaning to go beyond the letter of the law.
So the Torah says you got to do what's right and good in the eyes of God. The Torah commands us to go. The Torah commands us to go beyond the letter of the law. In this spirit, right, we have perhaps my favorite category of Torah Jewish legislation, which is this principle. Hold on a second. All right. A person is compelled by law not to act in a manner characteristic of Sodom. Now, who is Sodom and what is Sodom? Anyone familiar with Sodom?
That was the city of sinful activity.
Yes, there's a biblical city that is called Sodom. God informs Abraham, their behavior is so corrupt, it is so vile, I'm going to wipe this city off the face of the earth. Abraham pleads with God, maybe there's 50 righteous, maybe there's 40, right? Maybe there's 30. He goes through a whole list. And God said, if that was the case, I certainly would spare them. But ultimately, there is not. And through a miracle, they are wiped off the face of the earth. Our sages say, you are prohibited, we are forbidden from acting in the characteristics of Sodom, and we will actually compel you not to behave in this manner. So we need to know what exactly is the character of Sodom. What is Sodom-like character so we can avoid it? Text number 7a. This is a great Mishnah from Pirkei Avos. Marcus, why don't you read text number 7a, page 16.
One who insists what is mine, and what is yours, is of average character. However, another opinion maintains that such an attitude is characteristic of the wicked people of Sodom.
Is there anything that jumps out at you as being slightly off from the phrasing here in this Mishnah? And the Mishnah says, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. One opinion of the Mishnah says, this is an average character. A person who makes the statement, you're called normal. If you say what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, you're a normal person. Another interpretation is if you say what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, you are a Sodom-like character. What is the problem with this particular phrasing here? Anything look a little off here?
Well, it's a command to be generous.
Maybe we could determine it that way, and we're still a step away from that. But in terms of this, what I have here on the screen, is there anything that's in this screen that strikes you as being a little bit confusing? What is the nature of this behavior? What's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. Is this considered normal, or is this so evil that we have to wipe you off the face of the earth, right?
It's
Which one
selfish.
is it? Average or worthy of destruction? The gap, right? The gulf between these two cases is huge. It's almost impossible to bridge. How could the Mishnah say, well, either we consider you to be normal or you should be murdered by God? It's a little bit hard to stomach. So there's a fabulous comment that's made by the Meiri in text number 7b. I will share it with you orally. The Meiri says that in general, a Jew is obligated to help out and to assist their brother or sister. However, in a circumstance where that is going to actually cost you money, you're going to lose out financially, you may not be obligated to step in. If you're going to lose, you don't necessarily have to step in. And you are entitled to make the statement, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. In other words, you're saying, I have to protect what's mine. I'm sorry what's going on in your circumstance, but I don't have to lose due to your circumstance. Another way of saying that is, live and let live. What's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. If it's going to cost you money, a person can make this statement. That's considered average. That's considered normal. That's okay, right? You can say that. What is the other interpretation? The other interpretation is, in a circumstance where your friend, where your fellow is losing, and you have the ability to come in and help them, and it will not cost you a penny, you will not lose at all. If you don't step in to help when it costs you nothing and it benefits your neighbor, that is sodomite behavior. That is evil. That is reprehensible. That is worthy of a society being destroyed. And here our sages have said, it is prohibited to act in a sodomite manner. If it benefits your friend and costs you nothing, help the friend. You're going to be obligated to help your friend. So the implication, okay, I want to give you now an example. This is text number 8 from the Rambam of this principle being put into action. Phil, would you like to read text number 8, please?
Okay, a person has windows set in the lower portion of the wall of his house, and his neighbor desires to erect a building that would block them. The neighbor proposes to solve the problem by installing new windows in the upper portion of the homeowner's wall. If this arrangement won't cause the homeowner any difficulty at all and would not require him to leave his home during the construction, he cannot prevent the new neighbor from performing this construction. The homeowner is compelled by law to allow the neighbor to close the windows on the bottom part of his wall and create new windows higher up. This is because it would be sodom-like conduct for the homeowner to refuse this accommodation. This principle applies to every situation in which one individual will benefit while his fellow will not lose anything as a result. In all such cases, the relevant party is compelled by law to cooperate.
So we have a really fabulous example here that the Rambam brings. Your neighbor wants to build a house, a wall, some type of structure that the result of that building will be to block your windows and prevent you from having light in your house. But he has a solution. Your neighbor says, yes, I will close the window that is currently in your house now. However, my own dime, I will actually construct another window in the wall of your house that not only will be as good as the one that was there before, a person could even make an argument that it's better. But for sure, you will not lose at all. Not only that, you can stay in your house during the construction. You don't have to go anywhere. Not only that, I guarantee it will be clean, it will be spotless, it will not result in any inconvenience for you. This is a circumstance that is formulated in Jewish law as one person benefits and the other person does not lose at all. The Rambam writes, in such a circumstance, the court can actually compel you to cooperate. In this circumstance where the neighbor will have a great benefit by building the house, the wall, the structure that they desire, and the result being that the neighbor loses absolutely nothing because the neighbor will get a perfect window at no cost to themselves that provides all the benefits, if not more than before, you can't say no. If you say no, you're not just a stick in the mud, you're acting like the people from Sodom. It costs you nothing, it's helping a friend, agree. If you don't agree, we are going to allow your neighbor to go forward with the construction and close up the window in your house and to build a higher, better window. I want to give you another example, a more contemporary, modern example that you might be able to relate to. So imagine, Phil, you are on a plane, you are flying to Los Angeles for a conference, and you are sitting in the window seat. You like the window seat, you enjoy the window seat, you chose the window seat, you're very happy in that seat. The person sitting next to you in the middle seat taps you on the shoulder and says that they are on the flight together with their wife. However, when they booked their tickets, they could not find anywhere on the entire plane 2 empty seats that were next to each other. So he was forced to sit in this middle seat in this spot, while his wife is 10 rows behind them at a window seat. And he says, would you mind to switch seats with my wife? From a Torah perspective, you would actually be obligated to get up and to switch seats. You know why? It costs you nothing. You had a window seat, you will get a window seat. You're golden. The benefits that will provide to the other person, tremendous. They're going to be able to sit next to their spouse. From a secular perspective, there is no way, shape, or form that you can be obligated or forced to get up from your seat on the plane. Similarly, from a secular perspective, there's no way you can be forced to have the window in your house closed and another window being built for you. But from a Torah perspective, you're obligated to do the right thing. You're obligated to be a mensch. You may not act like the people from Sodom. And in a circumstance where there's a great benefit to one party, and you will not be losing, you can actually be compelled to act. All right, based on this principle, okay, just to review here the 2 types of people. The average character won't give other benefit when it comes to a personal loss. Sodom character won't give other benefit despite lack of personal loss, and we have to avoid that. Okay, let's go now to the case studies. Let's apply the principles that we've learned from Jewish law to the case studies of A and B. We're going to start with case study B. In case study B, Rachel had a beautiful garden. Joe decided to build a tall wooden fence. It blocked the sunlight, resulting in the destruction of Rachel's flower. Rachel asked Joe, why do you have to have this tall fence? He explains that cats can sneak in and destroy his birds. Therefore, he needs this tall fence to block them out. Rachel says, if that's the case, I will pay to remove the wood fence. I will install a fence that will equally, 100% equally serve the purposes that you have. However, it will allow light in and save my garden. Joe says, nope, not interested, and has no credible excuse. Based on Jewish law, can we force Joe to allow Rachel to take down the wood fence and replace it with a glass fence or not? What do you think, and what is your reasoning based on? Any thoughts?
With the big fence where the plants don't grow, isn't that like destroying life in another way when law is supposed to help create life?
Well, there's definitely some type of damage that's being done. That is for sure. There's no question that Rachel's flowers and garden are being damaged. The question is there anything that can be done about it from a legal perspective?
Well, from a Jewish law, it's no different than the example you gave with the windows at the bottom, and the guy said, I'll build a fence and then I'll have windows at the top of the wall. It's the same principle. Yes, he has to allow, from a Jewish perspective, he has to allow her to build this glass fence that will not let cats in to eat his birds and allow sunlight into her garden. And it's at her expense.
Absolutely, Karen. The only reason that Joe would refuse to do this is because he is wanting to spite Rachel. He is acting inconsiderate. This is sodomite behavior. And in this case, it is this baseless objection is Sodom-like. Now, if he has a real objection, then the law might be different. The law is different. But in a case where she is going to benefit and he will not lose, we're going to compel you. And the wooden fence will have to be removed. And again, Rachel's paying for it. Rachel is going to pay the whole bill, and the fence is going to be taken down. All right, now let's go to case study A. Right, we have Charles Crocker's 40-foot fence that he has surrounding the property of Young, spelled Y-U-N-G. What do you think? Based on what we've done so far, does the fence have to be removed or can it stay? Any thoughts, David? What do you think?
I just had actually a question about the first one.
Oh, hold on. We got a question about the first case.
Just really quickly, what if the, I can't remember the name of the guy who put up the fence,
Joe.
but if he subsequently gives a rationale that's a little different. He says, actually, it's because I don't want to see into your yard, or I want more privacy in my yard, and the glass fence won't serve that purpose. The glass wall won't serve that purpose. Let's say he's not really telling the truth. And again, he just wants to harm his neighbor. Is there some sort of, I mean, it seems like sometimes intent can be taken into consideration, sometimes it cannot. And sometimes it's viewed as valid, and sometimes it isn't. In the case of Jewish law, do we inquire into the truth of the intent of the person?
I believe that we do, and it probably would be up to the judge to determine whether he feels that the person has a valid reason for preventing the fence, or if what's really underlying it is spite. And if the judge feels that really it's spite, he probably could intervene. Now, in the case of Crocker, everyone agrees that it's spite, right? There's no disputing whether it's spite or not. The question is that a valid reason to remove it or not? Now, from a Torah perspective, I think that the answer is pretty obvious. The spite fence is Sodom-like. And a Jewish court would absolutely 100% say, Charles Crocker, it's very impressive that you are so wealthy that you could purchase all this land and build yourself this beautiful mansion. However, you are not allowed to behave like a sodomite. You got to be a mensch. You got to do the right thing. And you cannot build this fence to block out the light and the air, etc., from Mr. Young, and you have to take it down. Now, in the 1800s, right, the fence was actually allowed to stand. Right? Secular law asks this question: does the fence builder have a right to build? It doesn't ask the question, Is it nice? Is it kind? Is it compassionate? Will your mother be proud of you, right? It does not ask that question. It says, does the fence builder have a right to build? And at that particular time, there was absolutely no law against it. However, today, in some secular societies, the spite fence would be illegal. There's a handful of states, I don't believe it's really more than 10 or 12, that actually have spite fence laws. And they have a number. Many of them have a number of, this is the size that a fence is allowed to be. Maybe it's 6 feet in one state, 8 feet in another state. It could be 10 feet in another state. That's the size that you could build a fence. And if they determine that the fence that you're building is designed with the intention, the sole intention of harming, injuring, causing aggravation to your neighbor, then the fence could be removed. But that's in a minority of states, as opposed to the majority, which would allow you to do what you want to do on your own territory.
Well, we just call it zoning now.
Definitely, listen, I tell you in Bayside, if you want to build a fence in Bayside, there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. It has to be a size, a color, a shape, a distance. There's a tremendous amount of requirements. Whether that is an accurate reflection of the law as enshrined in the Constitution certainly can be debated. But definitely in Bayside, it's going to take a lot to build a fence. Yes.
Yeah, sure. There is an aspect of secular law that takes into account sort of good neighborliness, and those pertain to, like, you probably heard the term nuisance laws. So if you're doing something on your property that causes harm to surrounding properties, then there could be laws that more generally apply to prevent that kind of behavior. So if you're making something that's very like a odious a smell or something like that, you're burning something in a way that's not otherwise illegal. If it's causing discomfort and preventing others from enjoying their property, then you can be prevented from doing that. So that's more specific, more generalized than the spite fence laws, and they're pretty universal too.
So David brings up a good point that if a person is doing something on their property that is considered to be harmful to other people, the law is going to step in. And again, this is based on the principle, you cannot infringe on other people's rights. However, in the case of a non-spite fence, like Joe's wooden fence, odds are the law is not going to step in and do anything. Because even though the fence on a factual level injures and harms Rachel's flowers or plants, that's her problem, not Joe's. Joe has a property. He is entitled to put up a fence on his property. As long as that fence is not 15 feet high, right, or not higher than whatever the standard is, even though that fence on a practical level will cut off some sunlight, there's really nothing that anyone can do. His property, he has a right to do it. He's not doing it out of spite, and therefore there's probably not much that anyone is going to be able to do. Okay, let's move on to the next two cases, case C and D, but we have to introduce a new idea. Everything that we have been discussing more or less is what is going to be done on your own property. But what about forcing another person to do what's right and good on their property? What does Jewish law have to say about that? So here we're going to talk about a really fun law that anyone who has any real estate will appreciate: squatters' rights. Let's go to text number 9. Alan, could you read text number 9, please?
Sure. If one lives in his fellow's yard without the latter's knowledge, does he have to pay him rent or not? The question is in regard to a yard that is not on the market for rent, but the squatter is a person who usually rents. What is the law? Can the squatter say to the owner, "What loss have I caused you?" Or perhaps the owner can insist, "Look, you have benefited from my property instead of paying rent elsewhere." This is a case in which one individual benefits while the other does not lose anything. The Talmud concludes, Rabbah, the son of Rav Huna, stated, "My father ruled in the name of Rav that the squatter does not have to pay rent."
All right, we have to unpack this to make sure that we understand clearly what's going on. especially for any landlords on the in the class. The Talmud is dealing with a case where a person has a property that is not for rent. It is not a rental property. It is not on the market. Therefore, when someone else happens to be occupying that piece of real estate, they are factually not losing any money because it's not for rent. No one else could be renting it. No one else would be renting it. So in the bare bones case that we're discussing here, if a person discovers that someone was living in their property and they come to court, you cannot extract rent from that person because it was not a rental property. Therefore, you did not lose money because no one was, because the property would not be for rent. This is the same scenario as one person is benefiting, the other person is not losing out. If you could demonstrate that the person is losing out, for example, they damage the property, of course, 100% they have to pay for any damage that they do. But this is the principle that if you take the person to court, they will not have to pay back rent because it's not a rental property. Now, what if it is a rental property? You were trying to put this on the market and you were battling with this squatter for who knows how long? Yes, they absolutely would have to pay rent. It's a rental property. But if it's not a rental property, they're benefiting, you're not losing, you cannot get rent, okay? So if the house is not on the market, it's a win and no loss situation. The owner doesn't incur loss and the squatter benefits. Now, this is an important principle. We don't have a lot of time to get into it in too much detail, but I want to at least briefly mention it. The use of the property in the first place was legal in the past. Now, I don't like the way it's written here on this PowerPoint, but the idea that's being conveyed here, there is essentially no concept of trespassing in Jewish law. By a person merely walking onto your property without your knowledge, they are not inherently harming you or damaging you. The fact that it's yours versus theirs is not necessarily, I'm not going to say it as a general flat across the board, but at least in a general sense, we don't have a concept of trespassing. You're on my property, at least in terms of the past. In terms of the future, though, we have a whole nother question. Phil, you took the guy to court who was in your property that was not a rental property and he's living there for the past 3 months, and you want money from him and the court says, I'm sorry, he does not have to pay any money, right? It was not a rental, he benefited, you didn't lose anything. The guy wants to stay. Are you obligated and entitled to let the person stay, even though it's not a rental and you're not using it? What do you think?
Well, I'm not entirely sure, because whenever you stay in a place, there is wear and tear. And when they move out, you have to repaint it, resand the floors or whatever, just because of normal wear and tear. So there is ultimately a cost to you to have the squatter stay on your property, whether it's damage to the lawn, whether it's damage to the interior, just through normal wear and tear, not intentional, but just normal wear and tear, because everything needs to be kept up. So I'd say that there is some compensation. It may not amount to rental every month, but there is some compensation that probably the owner can seek redress for.
What you're saying is true, but that's not the issue that is being debated. Any cost that you will that will be due on you, absolutely you can charge that person for. The question here is, if there is no cost, again, just imagine a scenario where there is no wear and tear, there's no furniture, whatever the circumstance, there's no wear and tear. That's not the issue. The issue is you have a house in Door County, right? You are not going to be in the house for the next 3 months. You just discovered that someone's been living there. No wear and tear, the best would-be tenants that you ever had in your life. They want to stay there for free for the next 3 months. Based on the principle of they're benefiting and you're not losing, are you obligated to let them stay? The answer is 100% no. Absolutely not. You can kick them out. You can throw them out. There's no way you can that you can be forced to have them stay. For the past, you can't charge them rent. But for the future, they cannot stay. Why? So we have a beautiful analysis from a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Shimon Shkop. He was one of the leading Rosh Hashivas of the past century. Mitch, is your microphone working, or
It is.
now it is? You want to read it? Text number 11. All right, go for it, loud and clear.
Compromising control. In my opinion, the reason Tosafot rules that the property owner cannot be actively compelled to allow a squatter on his property is because compulsion in such an instance would be forcible negation of the property owner's control over his own property. Most people would object to this. The failure of an individual to consent to something that most people would object to cannot be considered Sodom-like conduct. However, the squatter's presence on the property without the owner's knowledge doesn't negate the owner's control of the property, because the owner retains the right to evict the squatter at any time.
So Rav Shimon Shkop says this quite beautifully, that when it comes to an event that you are unaware of and that you did not lose anything as a result of, you cannot argue that your rights were infringed upon. You didn't know it, and there's no loss. For all intents and purposes, nothing happened. But for something that you are aware of, it's a totally different story, right? Rabbi Shimon Shkop says if the owner protests, the squatter must leave. Why? Because control over one's property is an integral part of ownership. Part of owning property is the right to control who uses it and who doesn't use it. A past event, there's nothing you can do about, you had no idea. But when it comes to the future, you cannot deny the person the control of the property. So therefore, Phil absolutely can say, you better get out of my summer house in the Door County, even though you're benefiting and I'm not losing. You are losing. Why? Because control over one's property is an integral part of property ownership. This principle will help us answer the last two cases, and it's getting a little late. I don't want to go too far over time, so I'll try to do it briefly, but hopefully clearly. If you have any questions, let me know. All right. Case study number C. We're talking about using your neighbor's Wi-Fi. So we have a few critical questions. In the past, there were different type of plans. Depending on how much internet you used, you'd have to pay for more, right? If Michael using your Wi-Fi is going to cause you to have to pay for more internet, are they allowed to do it? Yes or no?
No.
No, because you are causing another person a loss. You're not allowed to cause another person a loss. Now, what about bandwidth? Anytime a person has internet, right, you get a certain download speed. The more people that are using the Wi-Fi, the lower the speed is going to be. Therefore, by you using your neighbor's Wi-Fi, you are essentially causing them to have less speed. Is this allowed or not allowed? It's not allowed because they are losing their bandwidth. So what about in a circumstance where your neighbors are out of town? They are not home for 2 weeks, guaranteed they are not home. Are you allowed to use their Wi-Fi? From a Torah perspective, Michael can use the Wi-Fi if it definitely won't cause damage. So in a scenario where it definitely won't cause damage, you're not causing anyone more money, you're not slowing down their internet because you're out of town, you are able to use it. From a secular perspective, you're still not allowed to use it. Now, there's not very clear legislation on this issue. However, people have been sued for using Wi-Fi that wasn't theirs, and there have been some issues. But from a secular perspective, a person can say, it's my Wi-Fi, it belongs to me, you can't use it. Torah doesn't go like that. The Torah says, don't be a sodomite. The Torah says it costs you nothing, another person benefits. Be a mensch, they're allowed to use it. So in a case, again, on a permanent basis, you wouldn't. But if they're not home, you would be allowed. All right, let's go to the next case study number D, parking in a neighbor's driveway who is out of town. In a circumstance, right? First of all, what do you think? Oh, well, actually, let's say it differently. What if your neighbor said no? All right, Karen, you asked your neighbor, you're going out of town for 2 weeks and it's so hard to find parking. Would you mind if I parked in your driveway? Right? And your neighbors say, yeah, I do mind if you park in my driveway. I'm not interested. Maybe you'll have an oil stain, right? Maybe you're going to run over my bushes. You know, whatever this, I don't want you parking in there. Are you allowed to, as soon as they leave to the airport, can you park in the driveway?
Of course not.
100% not. Even if you don't cause them any damage at all, you still cannot park in the driveway because loss of control of your own property is not okay. Now, what if you did not ask them? Now, obviously, we know from the perspective of Torah, you should be a mensch and you should ask a person. But what if you didn't ask them? It wasn't on your mind. It didn't occur to you. But all of a sudden, it occurs to you when they're gone that you need a parking spot. Are you allowed to park in their driveway? Sarah can park her car because it won't cause a loss. Now, again, if they do cause damage, if they leak oil, you have to pay 100%, you have to pay, okay? We're talking about a circumstance where you don't go on their grass, you don't run over everything, you don't drip oil, and in a circumstance like that, you can park your car there. Yes, Mitchell.
Arlene made a point earlier when it first came up that you may be benefiting them directly because your home looks like it's occupied and burglar won't come to it.
There you go. They have to pay you for parking in the driveway, right? And if they protest, we will send them to Arlene, who will represent your car. There's a good point, Arlene. All right, I want to conclude with one somewhat practical idea where you actually are able to force a person to use their property, even if they say no, right? What would a circumstance like that be? Let's say you live in an apartment and you ordered a washing machine and the washing machine cannot fit through your door. For whatever reason, it can't fit through your door. However, the way this wonderful apartment building is built, it can fit into your neighbor's door. And it could go from your neighbor's door onto the porch that you both share, and it'll go through the porch into your property. And your neighbor says, nope, you're not coming into my property. I'm not interested. No way, you're not coming into my house. From a Jewish perspective, we can force the neighbor to have the washing machine go into his house and then go around and into your apartment. Why? It costs you nothing. And it benefits your neighbor greatly. Jewish law says, don't be a sodomite, be a mensch. Secular law is going to say, it's my property, right? I have a right to control what happens on my property, and I'm not interested. Torah perspective goes even beyond that. All right. We didn't have time for this idea, but we'll cover it in further classes. So to sum up the ideas that we talked about today, the Torah can obligate you to do that which is righteous and good. There are certain circumstances where the obligation is specified by Torah's commandments, right? It's absolutely obligatory. They're part of the 613 mitzvahs. Then there are circumstances that are not spelled out in the Torah. However, you're doing the right thing in favor of a fellow, and you incur no loss, it would be obligatory upon you to do so. However, there's another category, and that is where doing the right thing in favor of a fellow, despite the loss. In this type of circumstances, it's not obligatory, but it's encouraged. An example of this is, the Talmud gives, is where Rabbah, who is a very famous Torah scholar, one of the most famous rabbis of his era, hired a bunch of workers to move and to transport some barrels of wine. These workers were negligent. They broke the barrels of wine. They spilled the barrels of wine, causing a tremendous loss to Rabbah. It was their fault. They were negligent. They come to Rabbah for payment. They say, we worked from you for 9 to 5 transporting these barrels. We would like our salary. And Rabbah says to them, salary? You caused me a loss, right? You owe me. I don't owe you. I'm not paying you. They took him to court and Rabbah lost. And he was forced to pay them their salary. Why? The rabbi said, yes, according to the letter of the law, they were negligent and they owe you, you don't owe them. However, Rabbah, number one, you are wealthy and can afford it. And number two, you are a rabbi, you are a sage, you are a scholar. Right? You need to be an example for the rest of the community. For you, you're obligated to go beyond the letter of the law. And in that circumstance, Rabbah had to pay the employees because they had no other income, they had no other job, even though they acted negligently. Rabbah had to go beyond the letter of the law. So we have circumstances where it's obligatory, and then there are other times when it is in fact encouraged. Explain. Right, there's a video that's supposed to be playing. It doesn't seem to be playing.
Not here.
Anything happening? No.
No.
Let's try this one more time. No, okay. The video is just a summary of everything that we discussed in the class. It's already 9 o'clock, so I want to let everyone go for the night. Thank you so much for joining us for lesson number 1. If you have not yet signed up and you are interested and you would like to continue through the course, please go to the shul's website and register, and I'll make sure that you get a hard copy of the book. I will order a book for you. If you want to continue learning on this topic, go to myjli.com/beyondright, and there will be the video that I wanted to show you. The PowerPoint will be there, as well as further articles, lectures, essays on this very topic. Lesson number 2 is going to be on Wednesday, right? 7:30 p.m., same Zoom channel, right? Same link that you had for this class will be the next class on Wednesday. Anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts before we conclude tonight?
Could you
Yeah.
order me a book?
All right, Mitchell, you got to unmute yourself. So who was that, Sandy?
Yeah, I need a book.
All right, I have a book for you. Right, I have
Okay,
a book
thank you.
for you. I could drop it off at Friendship Circle Cafe if that helps for you.
Sure. Would you like a bagel in exchange?
There you go. I will drop off the book for you. But Karen or Jeff or anyone who had not signed up, just send me a text or an email after the class. I will not be able to get it for you by Wednesday. The mail's not going to go that fast. But for sure, for the next class, I'll be able to get you a book. All right. Yes, Mitchell.
Well, I just would say that you still have to keep in mind that secular law that we know it as stemmed from a lot of Jewish law, even though you don't say that, but it did have its basis in Jewish law and then got picked up in secular law.
There absolutely is a similarity and a connection between secular law and Jewish law, but ultimately, I think as we demonstrated today, there's many differences, and we're going to see those differences perhaps grow in the next lessons. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight.